Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of DEI After 5. As we continue to have conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that I noticed is that there's some aspects of diversity that are often left out. We talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about sexual orientation. Sometimes people will talk about disability. But how often do we talk about religion and what that looks like in this space? And so today, my guest is Rahimeh Ramazany. I want to make sure I say that correctly. And she is a DEI consultant that works in the space around accessibility and disability, as well as religious diversity. So Rahimeh, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in this work. I know you just launched your consulting business. So can you tell us about your journey?
So I don't want to surprise anyone. I am Muslim. Okay, we're good. Yeah, I know, shocking. So that really is the heart and like the beginnings of me getting into religion within diversity, equity, inclusion in my DEI journey in general. I have a master's in intercultural communication, and I had a professor who recommended I go to a conference where I came across this field. And I feel that the intercultural communication field and DEI lend so much to each other and strengthen each other together. They are slightly different. And so that really brought me into the DEI realm. I've worked for a number of years in multiple organizations, both like in a consulting space, as well as program management, event management, nonprofits, and so on. But especially as, a Muslim woman, as someone who is visibly identifiable through wearing a headscarf, a religious headscarf, as a Muslim, it's a very specific way of walking through the world, especially in the United States, where I'm American. I'm born and raised in the United States. The vast majority of my life has been in the United States. So that's really my context. And being very obviously other and different, I am incredibly lucky and blessed that I have not faced hardcore Islamophobia. But there are a lot of people who just don't know anything of like actual, like based in facts or based in like nuance about Muslims. And a lot of the times when I meet people, if they're not like actively hating on Muslims, it's just kind of like, are Muslims aliens? I have literally no idea what you're about, and so on. So that definitely was a foothold, but also in a previous job, I did a lot of interfaith work or participated in the interfaith work that the organization did, and seeing how folks of other marginalized religious identities also were not able to bring their full authentic selves as much as they wished to the spaces that they were in, that they were not being accommodated with like their religious holidays or their expressions. Again, and we will definitely get into this, for sure. Yeah. A big point of talking about religion, forgive me, I am absolutely a talker. I promise I will stop. One of the sticky points about bringing up religion in DEI or in general, because of course, like we're all taught like, oh, don't talk about religion in politics. Don't talk about religion. It's not polite. Is the idea of like, oh, are you trying to convert me? Right. And I've had those conversations where people are like clearly trying to convert me. I know how uncomfortable it is. I hate being in those kinds of dynamics and conversations. So I would never want to do that to other people. But at the same time, like my work is around, there should be a place for people to express themselves. And if people are interested in learning in an interfaith sense about other religions, we can describe our beliefs, but not in a persuasive manner. Just like, this is what it is. You don't have to believe it, but this is what it is. But, please respect that I believe this.
I appreciate your explanation, because I think for so many people, and again, I brought up Christian. My father was an Episcopal priest, so it was very big part of my family. Like, you stumble over priest in my family. And so I understand how it could be a part. It is truly a part of your life. But just with any other identity, we can't leave parts of ourselves at home.
Yeah.
And so how have you seen this kind of impact, especially in corporate spaces, right? Because, I'm gonna ask that question, and I'll tell you why I'm asking that question in a second. But how does that impact, how people show up in corporate spaces, particularly?
I would say that there is a lot of minimizing of oneself. There is a lot of ascribing to white supremacy norms in order to survive, because there isn't the psychological safety to literally just exist as yourself, right? Not even to have like innovative ideas or bring up like, hey, have we considered this or that for a project? Nothing even as far as that, just literally putting your head down, making as little waves as possible, drawing as little attention to yourself, being as little other as possible. And especially like for people who visibly are different. And it's not just Muslim women who choose to wear the headscarf. Like, not all Muslim women wear this also, by the way, and that's totally fine. So even with that, but there are other religions as well that wear or behave in a certain way that makes it obvious to an outsider that they are of a particular religion. And if there is no concept of, inclusion around this topic, like, it's going to be very othering, and a place for biases to really like fester without putting a light on it and be like, hey, let's just investigate this, see what it is, see what it isn't, and then move on with our work, right? So in corporate spaces, a lot of it is just put your head down, don't make waves, try and hide as much as you possibly can of yourself. And then when you go home, you can like be who you actually are.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that is, not too long ago, I was facilitating for an organization, and we went into a business that, they said that we are very inclusive of all religions, all backgrounds, all faiths, yada, yada, yada. And I asked the question, and I was like, what holidays do you celebrate in December? And they were like, well, Christmas, right? Everyone has off for Christmas. And I was like, well, there's 14 religious holidays in December. So, so let's talk about
the other 13.
Right. What does inclusion look like in this space? And so it's about brainstorming kind of, how can we be more inclusive, right? Yes, there are the founders of that organization, were Christian, and they wanted to support that, but how many people have to take off or eat into their vacation time in order to celebrate, their holidays? And so it started this really interesting conversation that they thought they were doing all the great, wonderful things. But when you really think about it from the standpoint of, like you said, being the other, how many hoops do you have to jump through? How many extra steps do you need to take? How much time do you have to take away from vacation that everyone else is enjoying just to enjoy a holiday that the company is enjoying because they're Christian, right? So, that's one of the things that I have noticed immediately. And that's usually one of the first questions, like, which holidays do you take off? The other thing, and I want to talk to you about this too, is I've started to notice that some organizations are creating rooms or spaces for, and I can't even just say, because they're not saying for religious reasons, right? They're like these private spaces that you can move into.
They usually use like meditation rooms sometimes. Yeah.
So I was gonna say, talk to me about like what you've seen in that space. How, if they have those spaces, how could they make them more inclusive?
Yeah. So first, about the holidays, like, that is, for me, honestly, like, if I'm talking about religion and DEI, that is like the lowest bar.
Lowest hanging
Right?
fruit.
Just like the idea that other religions have holidays that aren't at the same time as Christmas, and also just want to like put a point on the fact that this conversation, when I have conversations around including religious diversity in DEI, it is never to take away something from Christians.
Right.
Right? Christians should be able to celebrate their holidays. They should be able to do the things that they want to do as a part of their faith, as is reasonable in like a multi-faith, interfaith, multi-ethnic society and company, right? So the issue with Christianity in DEI religious conversations is when superiority is right the rule, right? When Christianity is at the top and everyone else is like very clearly at the bottom, not even sometimes like even acknowledged, right? So that's the problem. Like, we're trying to level the playing field as we do with other aspects of diversity and identities, right? So I just want to be very, very clear that I am not, as a Muslim especially, like Islamically, I don't touch on the religion of Islam too much because I am not an Islamic scholar. There are many different sects of Islam that I am not familiar with. So just to be clear, I don't have these conversations to like talk about the religion of Islam too much, more about the Muslims, the people who do things for many different reasons, religion being one of them, right? And so the idea being is that with Christians, Muslims view Christians and Christianity as like a cousin faith, right? Just like Judaism is a cousin faith because they are Abrahamic faiths. And so we have a lot of the same prophets and we revere a lot of the same, like the vast majority of the values are the same.
Right.
But even in other religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and so on, like when you take away the terms that they're using in different languages and you like look at the descriptions of what their practices are, their values, it's like the vast majority of values are like
they're lines,
exactly, right? So going, and I don't want to go so far the other way to be like, oh, we're all basically the same and it doesn't matter. Not like, we're like we're not a gray blob and we like none of this ever matters. So anyway, just like having that middle ground. Okay, cool. So the idea being, right, is that we're trying to level the playing field so that people of different identities, there are some who are marginalized and some who are not, and privileged. And just like that phrase goes, those who are accustomed to privilege, when they are met with equality or equity, it feels like oppression, right? So that I feel like is something that I'm trying to preempt as much as possible with this whole shtick around like Christianity and like Christians, it's okay. Like I'm not trying to take anything away from you, which I do really mean. Right. Okay. So having said all my qualifiers, the idea with holidays being kind of the lowest bar, right? Because the idea, for instance, with Muslims, our most prominent holiday, of course, is Ramadan, which is a month-long celebration of fasting from sunrise to sunset. So not all day, every day.
Right.
You eat. No, I have people who are like, oh my God, you go a whole month without eating. Like, no, it's not possible. When the sun is up, we don't eat, we don't drink. And then when the sun sets, we eat. And then, do that for a month. And then, so the holiday of note is Eid al-Fitr, which is at the end of the month. And so it's a celebration of like commemorating, like, good job, we did it. It is not a, yay, it's over.
Right.
Right. No, because, a lot of times it's like, oh, fasting is so difficult. How could you possibly do that? I could never. Right. So Muslims don't see the fasting like, yes, it is difficult, but in a really meaningful way. It is a deeply spiritual time, reconnecting with your faith, reconnecting with your community and events, and breaking our fast together in meals at the mosque or at people's homes is huge.
Yeah.
So it's not a holiday of, yay, it's over. It's a holiday of like, congratulations, everyone. On a beautiful month and looking forward to next year and so on. Right. So the idea with Eid al-Fitr, what's difficult is because the Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar. And I do believe that the Jewish calendar is similar, is also a lunar calendar. Any Jewish folks who watch this, please do feel free to correct me, but I have been told by Jewish folks that is the case. So the idea is that we won't know when the start of Ramadan is or when Eid al-Fitr will be until we sight the new moon. And we're not going to know that for sure until the night before. So if a Muslim were to put in a request to their manager for time off for Eid al-Fitr, let's say, they're like, it could be this day or this day,
right?
This day. And like Muslims can't do anything. Like we literally will not know. So at best, which is still not great, like we could try and be like, okay, I think it's going to be this day. But then if it's not, they took the day off. Anyway, so that is a hassle. I understand. But if you are, as an organization, committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Muslims have no issues with putting this time off in advance. This past Ramadan, earlier this year, I saw so many posts on LinkedIn talking about Muslims who had put in requests for Eid al-Fitr off months in advance, a month in advance. They did all the things that you need to do to ask for time off, and it was still denied. Like a month, 2 months in advance, right? So the idea being is that if you can accommodate other aspects of identity, other faith requirements, or things that are really, really important to members of certain faiths, this is something that you are showing how much you really do value inclusion.
Yeah. And I think that's such a wonderful example because, oftentimes when managers decline these things, they're not thinking of the religious aspect of that, right? Like they're not thinking of the celebratory aspect of that. They're thinking of, we have a deadline, or like they're thinking of the business. And, I again go back to, I use December as an example so often because it's like, I know so many people that between Christmas and New Year's, the offices are crickets.
Yeah.
Offices may not be closed, but so many people take off, right? And so it's, how do we shift our mindsets so that we understand that time off, or that time of that downtime, I'm not going to say time off, that downtime may happen at other times of the year for other people.
Yeah. And there are people who don't celebrate Christmas during that time, or New Year's for that.
Right. And they
who would be happy to work. Not everyone. I'm not saying everyone. Is anyone watching this? Like, please understand, I don't speak for all Muslims. I don't know all people. There are many people with different opinions. But I do know that there are some people who don't celebrate Christmas who would be happy to work during that time in exchange for that time use some other.
Exactly. Right. And so that's how organizations can start to rethink time off, right? Or time away, or celebration of religious holidays.
Yeah.
The other thing that I touched on, I want to go back to, was just the spaces, right?
Yes.
Because I have seen, and I've worked in several organizations where we had a quiet room, we had a meditation room. And I think then there was like this one weird combination thing that we couldn't figure out. Nobody knew what it was, so nobody ever used it. Nobody knew what it was.
They had all of them? 3?
No. It was like in different
one. Oh, okay. I was like, wow.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of like this particular place. They did it as, it literally was a room with a chair.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, so what is the purpose of this room?
Like, because no decorations in the room and a chair.
And so, like, not all faiths.
That's funny.
Like,
so a couple of things come to mind. So one thing is having a separate space, and if you want to call it like a meditation space or a spiritual space, a quiet room, like, amazing. That's cool. And making it known throughout the company, like on onboarding, managers can remind their employees, like, hey, this exists. We want you to use it, right? Because a lot of times if employees don't have psychological safety in the organization and the organization is trying to change that, or if they have a new employee who hasn't experienced psychological safety up until this point, they're not going to believe you the first time you say it. So you have to like tell them multiple times. You have to encourage them. You have to like have people modeling that they
Yeah.
are using it, especially if it's possible for leadership or managers or director level people to be using the spaces. And this goes for all sorts of like accommodations. And if someone takes maternity or paternity leave, imagine if the CEO of the company takes paternity leave, like, oh my God, no, okay, so this organization really means it when they say they want fathers to take time off with their children. Amazing, right? Okay, I believe you now, right? If you are watching all of your leadership and your managers and just everyone as a new employee and no one is taking advantage of the resources, or like, they're like, no, like, I don't want to be the one person who's doing it, right? Like, so you have to be able to model those things. So
I say the same thing about self-care too. Like,
yes.
If you talk about self-care, I need you to be taking time off or doing what you need for self-care, and not just checking a box to say you talked about it.
Yes. Yeah. No, and that is so true. One thing for me that was a personal, very powerful experience was that at a previous job, I had a manager who openly talked about like, oh, I can't have a meeting at this time because this is my weekly therapy appointment, right? And just like completely normal. Like, this is when it is. I mean, it was in the morning before their shift, right? So it was like, oh, we can't do anything earlier than normal on this day because this is my weekly therapy. Like, oh my God, amazing. Right? And like, okay, there's psychological safety to like acknowledge mental health as a thing.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So that's as far as like using the room. And then also, because folks are not usually used to talking about religion publicly in a way that is inclusive and understanding of each other, most people that I have come across, even just like regular people, employees, when they talk about their own faith, they are used to, and it's something I had to unlearn, is that the only time you talk to people outside of your faith about your religion is with that like proselytizing, converting lens. And making that shift of, hey, everyone, this is what trying to like persuade someone sounds like, and here's what describing sounds like. So our goal, describing, if the person you're talking to is interested in hearing and has asked you, great, here you go. This is what we don't find acceptable, right? Making the policies very clear, making it very tied to your DEI statement and your DEI work in general, all the good things. So the idea being is that in the prayer space or in the meditation space, right, making it about like, you can't just create the room and be like, oh, everyone's going to play along really nicely. Like, you just put a little bit of structure there of like what is acceptable, behavior, right? Like, we don't want, the like Muslims have usually prayer rugs. They don't have to have a prayer rug, but usually like it helps keep things clean. That they're like Muslim prayers, if the audience has not seen. You can Google it. Please don't like go and try and find a Muslim person to like stare at them while they pray. Please don't do that. Like, you can Google it, like, what does Muslim prayer look like? I'm sure there are many pictures that pop up. But in the meantime, like, it is a very physical act, and part of it involves prostrating all the way on the ground, right? And so a prayer rug is important if it is available, just to have like a clean place to like be on the ground, right? And Muslims don't wear their shoes as well, pray. So if Muslims have their prayer rugs out, maybe asking like, hey, everyone, when you have finished using this place, please fold up the prayer rugs and put them in this box, right? Just as an FYI, if someone else is using the space, maybe make it about like, there's an occupancy number, right? Don't make it like, oh, people just know that the room is full and they just won't know. Like, let's just like, right? I mean, anyone who's been in a workshop, how many times have we been in a workshop and we do this, generally the same sort of community agreements at the beginning, like respect everyone. It's okay to disagree, but we have to do it in this way and not this way. Like
the same parameters, or, creating those parameters.
Because it's not that like, of course we generally hope and assume that most people will be respectful, but just in case, like, you need to put those like that structure there at the beginning, right? In the same way for these spaces, making sure like, hey, everyone, this is a room not just for any one religious faith or two religious faiths. Again, I do like calling it like a spiritual or meditation room, because a lot of times there could be people who are not like religious, who just need a moment to meditate, like literally just meditate. You have an app on your phone and you just want to like decompress. Amazing. There are studies that feel like that can be so helpful for mental health, for your productivity, for your concentration, and so on. Imagine if you
on my phone.
yeah, I know, that's crazy, right? So encouraging people to use it for that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, like having how many people can be in the
And
room.
occupancy.
Just,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
things.
And I think it's important what you said around identifying what those parameters are, because that same place that I worked that just had this chair and no one knew what to use it
Yeah,
for,
so no one's gonna use it.
it ended up being almost like this phone booth, like people took private calls in there, right? Which was so not the purpose of the space.
Yeah.
And so again, I think it's okay to clearly identify, like, use this space for, you know, how you want to support your spiritual growth or your religious practice or what have you. And it's okay to say that, right? Because what you're not saying is this is for everyone that's not Christian.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know there have been times at work that I'm like, I need to pray.
Yeah.
With somebody or something.
Yeah. We'll talk.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that I just love, you know, that you clearly stated that.
Yeah. I would say one thing that I just thought of, like I want to be very clear about also. One of the stipulations as a part of these rooms should be leaving proselytizing materials, little booklets, little pamphlets. That is not okay, right? Yeah. Don't be like, I'm gonna go pray, and I left these like pamphlets afterwards about whatever. Like, no, that's not. That's crossing the line into proselytizing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And back to your point too around educating people. It's one thing to have, and I've seen this too, where it's kind of basic definitions, right? Like for Sikh, Islam, Christianity, you know, whatever it is, and it's just high level information that basically you could get on Google. But I've seen that in some of these spaces too, where again, it's just like, oh, okay. And back to your point of people may see some commonalities. They may see like, oh, okay, I didn't know that about this particular religion, right? That's something that my family's been doing for years. And so it starts to make some of those connections where when we leave it to other folks, right, they make you think of how other people are versus how similar we are.
Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you for bringing up the psychological safety piece in this, because I think that is, and modeling behavior, because I think that that's another aspect where I've seen several leaders that have left their religious backgrounds or faith because they did not want to feel othered. And then that sends a message to their employees as well too. And so I think it's important, again, that everyone models the behavior that they want to show inclusion, particularly in this space, because we do it for so many other aspects of diversity and inclusion. So my last question for you is, how do you fill your cup? How do you take care of yourself as you're doing this work?
I definitely
it's not a quick question.
I definitely need to be better about it. I would say one, when I have the opportunity, being in community with others doing this work, and that's not, I guess, being in touch with my own religious community fills my cup a lot. It reminds me of why I'm doing this work. And also being in conversation one-on-one usually, or one-on like a group of 3 conversation with DEI folks that share my values. And honestly, most of the time they're not Muslim. And I see, again, like taking off the descriptions of like Islamic things. And if I just look at the values, they're exactly the same, right? I see so much of myself and my values in my colleagues in DEI who are not Muslim and don't know anything about Islam. I'm like, yep, that's Muslim. Yep, that's Islam. That's Islam. That's Islam, right? And gravitate. And I'm not saying they like anything like on them about
Right.
being Muslim, or like, but just like, again, the common values that if we take away the difference. So that's like a more, you know, I don't always have the opportunity to get on calls with people. So I take them as I can, and they're so incredibly valuable to me for that reason. But in general, I would say that recently I am trying to rekindle my love of K-dramas, which are Korean television shows. Especially, I love rom-coms. And the thing for me is like, I have DEI colleagues who will like do this work, which is so incredibly difficult, but then they'll go watch like dystopian end of the world shows. And I'm like,
no, I need something to make me laugh.
Like, I want to watch the fluffiest, most nonsense, silly show ever after working in the like. I can't handle more sadness and like injustice and like right. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah. So I'm going through Netflix and like they have a lot of amazing K-dramas if anyone's interested. Yeah, no, like K-dramas are amazing.
Wonderful. Rahimeh, thank you so much for being with us today. I learned a lot. It also reinforced a lot of things that I've been saying. And again, this is an aspect of diversity and inclusion that we don't talk about as much. And so I just am very appreciative of you joining us today. So how can people stay in touch with you or connect with you?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for this conversation. I'm so grateful to have been here and shared this time with you and your audience as well. You can find me at RahimehRamazany.com. Yes, I am sorry. You will have to learn how to spell my name. But you go there. I am also active on social media. You can learn like just from general content, educational content on diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural topics, especially, of course, around Muslim inclusion and religion and DEI. But I do talk about other topics as well. So social media and my website are excellent places to find me.
Wonderful. And I will say that I am not a huge fan of TikTok, but I follow you on TikTok.
Oh my God, thank you. Thank you. It's fun. It's like it's a beast. It's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. So yeah, thank you so much for that, because I think you have some wonderful content that's out there that is entertaining, but also educational, and it really causes people to think. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone for watching or listening to this episode of DEI After 5. You could tune in every Tuesday at 5:15, where we will drop new episodes every week. Be sure to subscribe here or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Again, thank you so much for being here. See you next time. Have a good one.